Topic is African American heritage on land and sea, and we're talking to Dr. TMYoung. And of course, Dr. Young, before we had our break, we were talking about some aspects of the Amistad incident as well as aspects of the international slave trade. And let's devote this segment to talking about the international slave trade, which will allow you not only to use the information that you have relative to slavery in North America, but it will also allow you to talk about some of the other aspects of slavery in South America as well. So let's talk. Let's have you to now talk about the international slave trade from that perspective.
As I point out in my book, Discovering Your African Ancestors, slavery was a part of the economic system of years past. It was said that in Africa, even slaves had slaves. But that was before the coming of the discussions of human rights, etc. Slavery was a case of to the fittest goes the spoil. In 1805, the international ban on slavery was in effect. England, Great Britain, who had been among the most active slavers, became equally as active in its attempt to banish the industry of slavery. So that in 1830, when the Europeans intercepted, captured Sinbei, PA, whose name was sort of vulgated to Sinke, and his comrades, they were actually violating international law. And so this case of the slaves aboard the Amistad became a case called Celebrate, because Sinke led a revolt on that ship, the Amistad, overpowered the ship and forced the sailors who knew the ways of the ocean and seas to bring them into North American ports. And so for 9 years the debate went on as to whether or not the Sinke and his comrades were free men who had been captured, or whether or not they were domestic slaves in that particular environment. Because you see, the international law allowed those persons who were already in slavery to continue to be their offsprings and issues, as they call it. But John Quincy Adams took the case of Sinke and his comrades, and they were eventually set free. The slave as hero, that is Sinke as a slave, rising up to take over this ship, is a signal point in American history. A man by the name of Herman Melville, one of America's favorite writers, did a book about that time, around the 1830s, called Benito Sereno. And the main character in Benito Sereno was a slave called Babel. And Babel did a similar thing in capturing this ship. So the Amistad and Sinke inspired writers to enlarge upon that particular incident. The sea has a great story to tell in terms of the African experience. We are familiar with the terms the Middle Passage and the term Middle Passage. And that journey from Europe to the Western world, to the New World, and the route back where I was referred to as the Middle Passage. We will have at our conference a workshop dealing with slave ships and their stories. And there are some remarkable stories about slave ships, the Amistad being only one. for about 300 years, the so-called legal and illegal traffic went on. And over 50 million Africans during those 300 years set out on those ships for the New World. Those ships went to the Old World too. Some went to Europe, to Great Britain, some went to Portugal, some few went to Italy. But the larger portions went to Central and South America, where the great sugar cane industry was flourishing and was the backbone of the New World. And of course, eventually the trade moved into the Caribbean and the colonies. And the economy, world economy at that period was cushioned very heavily on the backs and the blood and the sweat of these captured Africans.
You know, I think, Dr. Young, often you hear people speaking of the impact that sugar had, and I'm sure that you're familiar with what Mr. Lerone Bennett has said about sugar, how ironic it was that something so sweet could cause so much misery. And of course, I think that that is true in terms of the impact. But let's look at some of the things that you often talk about dealing with slavery in the Caribbean. I mean, what are some of the things that you believe that would characterize that institution in that particular part of the world and make it a little different from the institution in the western part of the world, I mean in the North American colonies?
Well, of course, during the early years of slavery, the West Indies, the countries, colonies or whatever, were used as a, you might say, training ground for the captured Africans. And not only Africans, but also some American Indians were sent to the islands to be broken in. And if you saw the movie about Captain Ahab, I can't recall the name of that.
Moby Dick?
Moby Dick, yes. You remember Pequot was on board that ship. Well, Pequot's tribe was one of the Indians that were captured and sent to that particular place to be broken in.
Dr. Young, let me interrupt you here for this final commercial break, and we'll be back with you following.